Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Belsmith Sector and 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Outer Rim. Belsmith Sector's de facto capital, not sure about de jure, is Bodajef, the planet that produces the AA-9 Coruscant-class freighter. They produce a lot of civilian ships, but this is by far the most important one, because this is the primary ship that delivers supplies down the major shafts of Coruscant. AA-9s fly down the levels to unload cargo containers at train stations miles below the surface, and the train network takes it from there to the underlevels. The AA-9 is small enough to fit into the shaft's width, while also being big enough to carry a lot of people and or stuff. When configured for passengers, the AA-9 can hold 30,000 people, and when configured for cargo, it can carry enough food to feed over 10,000 for a week. Coruscant's population being what it is, that means over 1 million of these freighters fly from the Ag Circuit to Coruscant every day just for food, with even more to handle machine parts, appliances, cookware, furniture, and everything else people down there might want to buy from any planet other than Coruscant. And on top of that, there's the AA-9s used to ferry people to and from Coruscant. The AA-9 is one of the only starships that's designed for atmospheric flight on a specific planet. Its specifications designed around the width of those shafts providing access to the underlevels, and despite what would ordinarily be a niche role, the sheer number of deliveries to Coruscant means that the AA-9 is one of the most common starships in the galaxy, despite the fact that you almost never see them outside the Arrowhead. You can tell Bodajef is kind of boring because instead of talking about the actual planet, I instead talked about how they made a ship for another, more interesting planet, and that's mostly how Belsmith Sector goes. Alba 16 was ruled by the Sith Empire, or one of its rump states, continuously for almost the entirety of the Old Republic era, and that sounds interesting, and Alba 16 is notable for being that way despite being relatively far from Korriban, but the Republic didn't actually destroy the Sith Empire as many times as they claimed to. They'd kill the Sith Emperor, destroy the Sith fleet, and then fly down to whatever the capital planet of that particular Sith Empire had been for some photo ops with Republic flags, but they didn't want to pay for a military occupation of the entire Trans-Hydean, so then they'd go back to the core, wind down their military, and leave all the surviving Sith Lords to fight over who got to be the new Sith Emperor. That fight could last for centuries before the Sith became the Republic's problem again, but in the meantime, planets like Alba 16 would be under Sith rule almost continuously. See, it's happening again. I start talking about Alba 16, except oops, actually I'm talking about Korriban and Coruscant. Alba 16 itself was home to a penal colony used by the Findians, which was shut down by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, but the Findians are from Demetrius Sector, so that's a story for another time. Harlowen is the swoop racing capital of the Outer Rim, which would be cool if swoop racing weren't pod racing's lame cousin that nobody likes, and Mafa'as Prime is full of casinos, racetracks, and arenas, and a casino planet sounds insane until you realize that it's one medium-sized city built around gambling tourism, surrounded by an otherwise empty planet. Irmenu is kind of interesting unto itself. It's one of those planets like Kenari that got colonized but then fell through the cracks of the galaxy and was forgotten about. Since it was part of explored space, no one was coming through to check planet by planet for habitable worlds or useful resources, so no one really noticed that Irmenu had devolved into a mostly Iron Age society ruled by a theocracy called the Imperious Priesthood. Records don't say for sure, but this sure sounds like a place that fell off the map due to disastrous policies implemented in the Pius Dea era, and went from theocratic hybrid regime to full-on theocratic dictatorship without anyone noticing or cleaning them up after the 6th Alsacan conflict. The place is covered in ocean, but they have to use sails and oars to get around because they have one starport, the Imperious Priesthood runs it, and they're real picky about what technology is and isn't allowed on the planet. Blasters and comlinks are allowed, but speeders and skiffs aren't. No idea why, and given it's the decree of a stagnant priesthood, it's probably a stupid compromise arrived at after months or years of exhausting arguments, adhered to centuries or millennia later because it became the way things are done here, and you're not allowed to question traditions no matter how stupid. In addition to some tech coming down, people also leave the planet sometimes. Princess Natasa Dalla's family was killed in a power struggle, but the victors sent the infant princess to an orphanage on Bodajef rather than kill a baby, for example. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Dalcan Sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Expansion region. Planet Rigel 12 nearly left the Republic during a clan rebellion in the late Republic era, where Republic diplomat Dulb Snoil was saved from the crossfire of the rebellion by Jedi Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's a minor world, and the whole for Khan basically amounts to a gang war by galactic standards, so the only reason to even bring it up is because Obi-Wan Kenobi was involved. Not every sector has a story. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Mandalore Sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Outer Rim. Let's get the weird, obscure stuff out of the way before the main event. The Findians were one of the species conquered by Mandalorians in the Old Republic era, before Mandalorian space was incorporated into the Republic, which is why they don't have their own sector. In the Late Republic era, they were ruled by a local criminal organization called the Syndicate, which had perfected a technique called renewal that could be used to mind-wipe Findians like they were droids. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn busted the Syndicate, it might be pronounced Syndicat, restored democracy to Findar, and the newly elected government immediately outlawed the renewal technique. This sector is also home to the Jackelians, another species conquered by the Mandalorians, although their history begins and ends with being conquered by and eventually joining with the Mandalorians. They might be humans or Findians whose planetary demonym has been mistaken for a species name. That happens sometimes. The original Mandalorians were of the Tong species, back in the days when mythosaurs were common. According to legend, the Tong were originally native to Coruscant before being forced out during the pre-Republic era and coming to settle on Mandalore in what was then unknown space, although I suspect this is a confused blending of two different Mandalorian origin stories. The original Tong species are probably native to Mandalore, and the human Mandalorians probably arrived during the Proto-Republic era, after losing a power struggle on Coruscant after the discovery of hyperdrive made long-distance colonization feasible, but before the official formation of the Republic. Regardless of how exactly they got there, the Mandalorians became a significant regional power during the Old Republic era, varyingly allying themselves with either the Republic or the Sith Empire. The original Mandalorian Crusade was led by Mandalore the Indomitable, and established the Mandalore sector through conquest as an ally of the Sith Empire of Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun. Mandalore the Indomitable was killed in the Exar Kun War, and succeeded shortly thereafter by Mandalore the Ultimate and his Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. The Neo-Crusaders opened up the Mandalorian way to anyone who could prove themselves in combat, not just the Tong, and that led to conquered Mandalorian subjects like humans and Jackelians that joined the Mandalorians, and the establishment of entire new clans that quickly crowded out the Tong, like Clan Ordo from the desert planet of Ordo. The Neo-Crusaders had a more rigid chain of command and standard military structure than Mandalorian tradition, and with their renewed numbers and more disciplined way of war, they fought the Republic in the Mandalorian Wars. These are the wars that gave Darth Revan their trial by fire, forging them into a Dark Jedi who would eventually become Dark Lord of the Sith. The Mandalorian War ended when Revan killed Mandalore the Ultimate, scattering the Mandalorians across the Outer Rim, where they would go on to be a menace throughout the war with Revan's Sith Empire and its immediate successors. After many years scattered, the Mandalorians were brought back together by Canderous Ordo, an ally of Darth Revan after they turned on their old Sith Empire. Canderous Ordo became Mandalore the Preserver and reconsolidated the Mandalore sector as Mandalorian territory. Despite the galactic ambitions having been crushed, the Mandalorians remained a major regional power throughout the Old Republic era, especially in the New Sith Wars, when the splintering of both the Republic and the Sith Empire left the galaxy without any major powers, only two loose, galaxy-spanning alliances. It wasn't until several centuries into the High Republic era that Mandalorian power fully and finally collapsed as a result of the Mandalorian Excision, a Republic effort spearheaded by the Jedi to destroy the Mandalorians as a military power once and for all. The Mandalorians subsequently morphed over many centuries into a pacifist society focused on technology that ultimately joined the Republic. Famously, they were the leader of the neutral faction in the Clone Wars, and were taken over by a coup by Death Watch, a rogue faction who embraced the old militant ways of the Mandalorians. The coup was backed by Darth Maul, and if you believe the rumors that Palpatine was a Sith, then part of the reason why he sent the 501st Legion to reincorporate Mandalore into the Republic was to kill Maul and tie off a loose end. It's not like the power-mad dictator-to-be needed a special reason to reconquer a neutral planet, though. The 501st successfully installed Bo-Katan Kryze as ruler of Mandalore for like 5 minutes before she got sick of the Empire and the Empire got sick of her getting sick of them, and installed the more compliant Gar Saxon instead. Mandalore remained loyal to the Empire for most of the Imperial era, but 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, as rebel activity spread across the galaxy, the pro-rebel clan Ren rebelled against Clan Saxon, united most of the Mandalorian clans behind them, and successfully dislodged Clan Saxon and their Imperial backers. The Imperial counterattack fusion-bombed every city on the planet, devastating the population, and scattering what few Mandalorians were left across the galaxy. About a decade later, in the New Republic era, the Mandalorians eventually reunified and reclaimed Mandalore despite the opposition of the Imperial remnant. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Mirian Sector in the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Outer Rim. The sect are a supposedly insectoid species of caveman aliens. As usual, I find it hard to believe that these guys have somehow never adopted galactic standard technology despite having been in explored space since fairly early in the Old Republic era. They're also really caveman-y caveman aliens, with their whole culture revolving around the ancient words, an oral tradition telling the history of their species. Oral traditions are perfectly typical things, but they're also much more common among Stone and Bronze Age societies than Iron, Steam, or Space Age societies, so I find it suspicious that these caveman aliens have an oral tradition that's basically called the oral tradition. Just seems like something an outsider from a culture with a literary tradition would make up when inventing a Stone Age society, rather than something a Stone Age society would invent for themselves. Mirian Sector was one of the first Republic sectors targeted by the Mandalorians during their Neo Crusade, a revenge campaign to restore Mandalorian martial pride and expand their territory after they and their Sith allies lost the Exar Kun War a few decades earlier. The mining world of Vanquo was turned into a Republic fortress, and the Mandalorians made diversionary attacks there to draw in the main Republic fleet before their primary attack fell on Taris. Turns out that was completely unnecessary though, because they captured both planets. Flashpoint is a star system that fell under Mandalorian control during the Mandalorian Wars. The Neo-Crusaders established a space station here, where captured Jedi were experimented upon to try and find the source of their force powers. The Jedi eventually rioted, seized control of the station, and drove off or killed all Mandalorians aboard before departing themselves. No word on what happened to the station after that. Maybe it decayed into the star. It's been thousands of years, so there's plenty of time for that to happen. But if not, then surely the Empire popped in to see if there was anything useful for Project Necromancer, right? Mirian is also home to Bandamir, which wasn't unimportant to the Mandalorian Wars, but comes up in the Late Republic era. Bandamir is a pretty unremarkable agri-world, but according to the stories, Qui-Gon Jinn's failed apprentice Xanatos once sent a fake distress signal from the planet, and Qui-Gon went there with Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Jedi Padawan who'd bounced out to the Agri-Corps after no Jedi Master would take him on as an apprentice. The maverick Qui-Gon had his eye on the kid, though, and decided to respond to the distress signal from the planet Obi-Wan was bound for. Xanatos was affiliated with Off-World Mining Company, that's capital O, M, and C, the company is called that. I assume it's because their headquarters are located on a planet that they don't have any mines on. Anyway, it's a mining company with operations on Bandamir, and which transported lots of mining explosives in, and which was also having a low-key war with rival corporation Arcona Mineral Harvest, so all kinds of wacky accidents could happen without implicating Xanatos in particular. Xanatos had never gotten over being bounced out of the Jedi Order, and took the opportunity to try and blow Qui-Gon Jinn up for revenge, but Qui-Gon thwarted the scheme with Obi-Wan's assistance. Obi-Wan having performed well in Qui-Gon's improvised trial by fire, he took Obi-Wan as his Padawan apprentice. I like this story, I want it to be true, but it is unconfirmed, and I do find it kind of contrived that Obi-Wan was assigned to a planet that just so happened to have a distress signal sent by an old apprentice of Qui-Gon's, one who had been kicked out of the Jedi Order when Qui-Gon deemed him unworthy to complete his training. Like, what are the odds that Obi-Wan gets sent to the one planet that's being menaced by Qui-Gon's rogue apprentice? Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Mezeg Sector and 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Mid-Rim. The only semi-notable planet in Mezeg Sector is Sif Krik, allegedly home to two species, the native Sif Kree and their rivals, the Frezliks. Some documents indicate that the Frezliks were from another planet, others put them as native to Sif Krik, and nothing particularly indicates that these are actually separate species, so as usual I suspect that at least one of these is a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name. The story goes, the Frezliks blockaded Sif Krik to try and pressure the Sif Kree into bending into their demands, and Wedge Antilles ran the blockade, got shot at, and ultimately this escalated into the New Republic fleet showing up to shatter the blockade. This was about 15 years after Jakku, so the New Republic fleet was puny, but the Frezliks fleet was also pretty puny, so I don't find this story impossible. New Republic X-Wing Rangers getting involved in planetary disputes happened all the time in the New Republic era, and while it doesn't usually result in them calling up a cruiser strike group, the New Republic did have a few cruisers lying around, even at the point of maximum demilitarization, so it was possible. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Morshdeen Sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the Trans-Hydean region of the Outer Rim. The first planet we're talking about is Edusa, a minor industrial world mainly famous because the Sith Empire enslaved it during the Great Galactic Wars, but Leontine Saresh organized an uprising that threw the Empire off the planet. They subsequently rejoined the Republic, and she went on to become Supreme Chancellor during the Second and Third Great Galactic Wars. Under Republic tradition, Morshdeen Sector is the domain of the Utula species, given to them to rule according to their own law and traditions. The Utulin are an aquatic species ruled by a theocratic monarchy. You don't normally get such openly dictatorial sector governments in Republic sectors incorporated during the Old Republic era, after the Republic had started defining itself by its democratic institutions, in opposition to the aristocratic tyranny of the Tianese hegemony, the Hutt Empire, and the Sith Empire. Records don't say how Utula joined the Republic, but I'm guessing they got a pass on the whole theocracy thing, because the Republic wanted more presence near Sith space to serve as a buffer for the Inner Rim and core. The monarchy was overthrown in the late Republic era by the Revolutionary Purist Council, a more radically theocratic faction who disliked the ways in which the monarchy had drifted away from the allegedly stricter traditions of times past. In practice, most people claiming their ancestors used to be stricter about religious laws are usually lying. Religious traditions always have a rigid core of strict adherence surrounded by many people who obey some, but not all, of the precepts. In any case, Princess Fulukula was the only survivor of the monarchy and retreated to Dur Saban, a planet inhabited by sapient sea serpents, also called the Dur Saban, and made an alliance with a smuggler named Vilmar Grark. Grark. Anyway, that smuggler bombed the Capitol building, killing most of the Revolutionary Purist Council in one strike. Despite being a species homeworld, Utula apparently has a puny population, because bombing just one building caused the revolutionary government to surrender pretty much instantly. There's something to be said for shock and awe, but that still indicates a total population of like 1 million people tops. I don't know why the Dur Saban don't get their own sector. They have hands and stuff. They seem perfectly capable of interacting with galactic society. The Tan Green are also allegedly a sentient species of Morstein sector. They have no physical description, so as usual, I suspect this is a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name, although there is a pretty good reason for why these guys may have never integrated into the Republic. The surface of their world is pretty barren and lifeless, and they live as nomads moving from one cave network to another, living off the fungal ecosystems in those caves, and moving on before they deplete one cave network too much for it to recover. This is the kind of civilization that could be invisible to Republic explorers, popping down to check for habitability and inhabitants. The story goes that the Tan Green were enslaved by the Empire in order to build an ISB regional headquarters on the planet, and in order to avoid interference with ISB operations, the Tan Green were hunted down and totally eradicated. Especially for a culture who spend most of their time living in caves, I find it really unlikely that the Imperials got all of them. Orbital bombardment is of limited use against people who live underground, and sending stormtroopers into the caves to kill them all would have gotten a lot of them, but it would have been super easy for pockets of survivors to slip through the cracks in the labyrinthine tunnels. There's no word of any survivors in the New Republic era, but it's not like they would be super eager to send a message off-world to let aliens know they're still alive, nor has the New Republic dedicated a ton of resources to finding any survivors. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Ojoster sector and the 10th Crimson Claw Command of the Transhydian region of the Outer Rim. Palazides was a resort world run by Tagco, in which starships weren't even allowed to enter the system without an invitation, so dedicated are they to privacy. This naturally means that wealthy criminals like to set up shop here, like Ort Hugr De'en, an anti-imperial terrorist who bombed a prep school for imperial teenagers who plan to join the imperial military upon graduation, usually children of currently serving imperial officers. Imperial Sub-Commander Braj Tal hunted Hugr De'en down on Palazides and strafed his base to pieces with TIE fighters. Didn't have any bombers, and he was there with a Carrack-class gunship left over from the Clone Wars, so you can really tell this was an Imperial officer seeking revenge for his murdered son, grabbing whatever resources he had command over, and just unilaterally hunting down the culprit. The Empire being what it is, no one really cared as long as he didn't step on any toes of higher-ranking people while he did it. Palazides later joined the Crimson Empire, a short-lived Imperial remnant led by one of the Emperor's former royal guards. Backstabbing tore the Crimson Empire apart almost immediately, but Han Solo had to dig out holdouts on Palazides with a solo fleet, the portion of the New Republic fleet under his command for a few years following Jakku. The New Republic began demilitarization almost immediately after they were officially declared on Coruscant, but decommissioning fleets takes time, and leaders like Lando Calrissian, Admiral Akbar, and Han Solo put the ships to use in the meantime. The Solo fleet is mostly known as the nemesis of Zinj over in 11th Blazing Claw Command. This Palazides thing was just a side quest. The Crimson Empire mostly destroyed itself. Ojoster sector is also home to the planet Wayland, its mountain Mount Tantus, and the Imperial Tantus base built into it. Wayland fell off the official record supposedly due to some kind of accounting error, and was rediscovered by the CIS, who used it as a hidden mad science lab. That never really went anywhere. When the Imperials dug them out, they repurposed the lab into a base for Project Necromancer, along with other experiments like the Clone Assassin program and whatever they were doing with the Zillo Beast clones. Supposedly, Wayland is home to two native species, the Miniirish and the Poseidons. These two don't get along, and the Imperials subjugated them both to prevent them from interfering with their operations in Tantus Space. Tantus Space was the primary hub for Imperial genetic research until it got wrecked by Havoc Squad, formerly called Clone Force 99, and the Empire shuttered the base and redirected research from Mad Genetics to their other projects, especially the Death Star. Okiab 6 was a minor agri-world conquered by the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars of the Old Republic era, although they can't have left too many troops there because the story goes that the locals overthrew the local garrison without any reinforcements from the Republic. Surja, another agri-world — there's a lot of agri-worlds in Ojastra Sector in order to feed the Ecumenopolis of Terrace, which we're getting to — Surja was the site of 4 different early battles between the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders and Republic forces. The Mandalorians eventually won out, and must have garrisoned this place more effectively because they held onto it until the end of the war. Jebel was an ice mining world that keeps the nearby Ecumenopolis of Terrace supplied with water. Jebel is technically habitable, it has breathable air, land you can stand on, and it does have plenty of water that you can melt for hydroponics. It had a population of millions back when it was part of the Jebel-Vanquo-Terranith line of defenses guarding Republic territory in and around Terrace from the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. The Mandalorians feinted at Vanquo, launched an attack directly at Terrace, and cleaned up Jebel with minimal resistance in the aftermath, Republic forces having already been diverted to and destroyed at Vanquo and Terrace. Jebel became the headquarters for Mandalorian mad scientist Pulsifer, and was supposed to be a staging area for further Mandalorian assaults throughout the Republic mid-rim, aimed at penetrating all the way to Alderaan, but then Pulsifer scrounged up a Sith artifact called the Moor Talisman and started poking at it to find out what it does, and it turns out that what it does is unleash the Rakghoul Plague. The Mandalorians were completely ripped apart from the inside, and although Pulsifer was temporarily able to assert control over the Rakghoul hordes using the power of the talisman, it abandoned him for Jedi infiltrators who were stronger in the Force. The talisman tried to corrupt the Jedi but failed, and ultimately they escaped and the Mandalorians fusion-bombed the planet, melting the ice into a radioactive sea and drowning all the Rakghouls not killed by the bombardment. Planet Denova was briefly important during the Great Galactic Wars of the Old Republic era, when baradium was discovered there, leading to the Republic fighting for control of it with the Sith Empire. Stretched across multiple fronts, the Republic hired Trandoshan mercenaries to hold the planet, but the Trandoshans abandoned the Republic to form an alliance with the renegade soldiers from the Sith Empire. The Eternal Empire, an empire from the unknown regions ruled by a Sith offshoot, but whose Sith affiliation was secret, later attacked the planet, leading to the mercenary forces there quietly redeclaring allegiance to the Republic to receive reinforcements to hold the planet against the Eternal Empire. However, because the Sith nature of the Eternal Empire's ruling family was secret, when they were overthrown from within and the faction was reformed into the Eternal Alliance, the rebels had no Sith influence and the Republic briefly considered them allies. Republic forces on Denova defected to the Eternal Alliance, and because the Republic had a truce with the Alliance, hoping to court them as allies against the Sith Empire in the brewing Third Great Galactic War, the Republic's central government on Coruscant did not respond to the defection. However, civilian control over the Republic military was fraying, and a Republic admiral went rogue and attacked the Republic-turned Alliance forces on Denova. The Eternal Alliance won the ensuing battle, but tensions rose between the Republic and the Alliance as it became clear that there were significant anti-Alliance factions in the Republic military, and the Republic was not really capable of keeping them from going rogue with entire divisions. And, of course, I've been building up this whole time to Terrace, the Coruscant of the Outer Rim. Or, at least, it was. Also, it's not the only Outer Rim Ecumenopolis to claim that title. DeSevero also calls themselves the Coruscant of the Outer Rim. Terrace is the most famous Coruscant of the Outer Rim, though, settled near the end of the early Republic era and rapidly growing into an Ecumenopolis because of its location at the crossroads of the Hydean Way and the Mandalorian Road, making it the trade nexus of the entire Outer Rim for most of the 4th millennium of the Coruscant Reckoning. The final century of that millennium is when things came unraveled, as trade routes shifted away from the Trans-Hydean and into the new territories. Terrace was still a major trade hub, but not the kind of place that could properly sustain 1 trillion inhabitants. Pollution had devastated the ecosystem of the planet, decreasing the food output of the oceans, the only part of the planet not covered in city, at the same time as declining trade made the planet poorer and thus less able to import food from the agri-worlds that had been colonized throughout Ojastra Sector to feed them back in the Golden Age. Resource scarcity led to uprisings against the aristocracy hoarding food on the upper levels, which led to decades of sustained civil war. The Rakghoul plague broke out in the lower levels and sewer systems somehow, and Gamorrean slavers descended on the world to take advantage of a population of hundreds of billions in chaos, in which the kidnapping operations could frequently operate in broad daylight without drawing any retaliation. The upper and middle cities remained mostly stable, but the lower city absorbed the resource shortage brought about by the decline of a planet totally incapable of supporting its own population. The lucky ones escaped Terrace to other planets. The unlucky ones were killed by famine or plague, kidnapped by Gamorrean slavers, or died in the riots and gang wars. In the Mandalorian Wars, the attack on Karis came after a diversionary strike on Vanquo left the planet underdefended, so the Mandalorians caused relatively little damage while conquering Terrace. The Republic reconquest came after Malachor V, when then Jedi Revan had defeated Mandalore the Ultimate, scattering the Neo-Crusaders. Quite a few of the remnants dug into Terrace, but they were disorganized, had poor morale, and were surrounded by a massive population that hated them. The lower city was a no-go zone for the Mandalorians because the locals down there were all combat veterans of 100 gang wars and knew the labyrinthine terrain far better, and even after decades of depopulation there were still billions of people down there. The higher levels were Republic loyalists, eager to feed the Navy and revanchist Jedi information on where the Mandalorians were hiding. Terrace was then hit by one of Darth Revan's early surprise attacks from their new capital at Korriban, captured before the Republic had properly remilitarized from the end of the Mandalorian Wars. Despite having changed hands 3 times as a major flashpoint of 2 different wars, Terrace was nearly unscathed by the conflicts, which was good since it had been so ravaged by other calamities that it didn't have a whole lot of fight left in it. And then Darth Malak orbitally bombarded the planet because he'd got word that Jedi Master Bastila and his wayward master Darth Revan were down there, and he quite liked being Sith Emperor and did not want to yield the throne back to Revan. Both Revan and Bastila escaped because, as has always been true, you can't actually kill a planet with orbital bombardment. You can kill most of a planet, though, and Terrace's population never fully recovered from the devastation. Skyscrapers being what they are, no one from the upper or middle city survived, and strictly speaking, even the people of the lower city were hundreds, sometimes even thousands of feet above the surface. The lowest levels of the city were pure infrastructure and weren't supposed to have any inhabitants, but they did, and only some of them were Rakghouls. Terrace was rebuilt from this population of under-city survivors, but by the time of the Galactic Civil War, it was said to have a population of only 1 billion. That barely qualifies them as a major world. If their ecosystem hadn't been ruined, they wouldn't even need to import food. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Plu Sector and 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Plu Sector is where the galaxy stores all of its weird goober aliens. There's basically zero history out here, but it does have Plu 2, home of the Glimphids, and Plu 4, home of the Flugrians. These two had a war at some point, no word on who won, and they're both still around, so I guess it was probably inconclusive. Planet Sirocco is the home of the Starebs, who had neat stone cities, had past tense because the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders fusion-bombed them all after capturing Terrace and punching deeper into Republic space from there. As usual with planetary bombardment, the world was not totally depopulated, but most of the people down there were killed. Plu Sector was added to the Republic in the humanocentric Pius Dea era of the early Republic, and you can tell because they squished a bunch of alien species together into one sector to minimize their influence on the Senate. In the Galactic Civil War, Plu Sector was a major source of grain, and the rebels ran Operation Grain Snatch to steal a bunch of food to feed their growing army after the Battle of Yavin, when they got a ton of Imperial defectors and had outgrown their existing supply chains before they knew it. Overlord Gorin, who I assume is some kind of sector moth, even though his official title is Overlord for some reason, faked the defection to give the rebels a bunch of poisoned grain, but the rebels detected the poison, swapped the grain around, and poisoned a bunch of Imperials who were hopefully combatants and not random civilians. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Quelii Sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the new territories of the Outer Rim. There's a bunch of slightly interesting worlds lying around here, like Praven Prime, homeworld of the Lejing and their enemies, the Guvandi, who became enemies when an assassin droid disguised as a protocol droid intentionally mistranslated at a diplomatic meeting to increase the tensions and provoke conflict. It's not clear if these are species or cultures, though. There's definitely other species here, but also this is one of the sectors added during the Crusade of the Wilds in the Pius Dea era of the early Republic, when the Contespex dynasty had controlled the Supreme Chancellorship for like 30 terms in a row, and used high human culture as a justification for forcibly incorporating lots of alien species into the Republic. This was allegedly to liberate them from the degenerate brutality of Hutt culture, the primary enemies of the Republic back in the early Republic era. This justification grew thinner and thinner as the Crusades wore on. The first 4 targeted the Hutts directly and, while aggressive, were perfectly in line with the goal of limiting the reach of the greatest slave power in the galaxy. By the time of the 10th Crusade, the Crusade of the Wilds that incorporated Quelii sector, the Republic was trampling the sovereign power of aliens to forcibly incorporate them into Republic sectors designed to minimize their representation in the Senate in blatantly illegal acts of aggression that didn't even significantly weaken Hutt power, since these were parts of the galaxy on the other side of the Republic space from the Hutts. The Mandalorians and the Night Sisters were both roughly in the warpath of the 10th Crusade, and either or both might have been part of the justification, except I can't really find any record of either Mandalore or Dathomir actually being targeted by this crusade. The Pacian Empire seems like it was probably a leftover in the Pius Dea era, a human empire in Quelii sector that collapsed and got absorbed into the Republic during the Old Republic era. The Cavrilhu pirates operated out of the planet Amoris in the years immediately following Jakku, when the Imperial Remnant oversectors were struggling to maintain coherence. 10th Crimson Dagger got usurped by a rogue royal guard and then got torn apart by infighting almost instantly. Zinj took over 11th Blazing Claw and started ripping off chunks of other oversectors at the first sign of weakness. The Sutric hegemony was stable for a bit, but really disliked their fellow remnants in the Pentastar alignment strategy of withdrawal to the Outer Rim and tried to absorb them, lost, and got subjugated to the more cooperative members of the Imperial Remnant, and Quelii sector wound up in an ambiguous zone of control between the New Republic and a churning sea of Imperial warlords who fought each other as much or more as they fought the X-Wing Rangers. Fantastic time to be a pirate. Around the time of the formal declaration of the First Order, the New Republic finally, firmly laid claim to the Quelii sector and cleaned up the Cavrilhu pirates. Planet Halmad was used as a base for the Hawkbat Independent Space Force, another pirate group who took out the Imperial Remnant on Victory Base, an old Imperial base on planet Halmad, except that secretly the Hawkbats were Wraith Squadron, an X-Wing Ranger squadron that harassed the Sutric hegemony and Zinj's empire while disguised as pirates for plausible deniability. And you can tell how short-lived the Crimson Empire was because Wraith Squadron never flew a single mission against them, despite being smack in the middle of their territory. Salagas is the planet where Zinj's empire collapsed. The New Republic was in talks with the Imperial Remnants discussing demilitarization and a peace treaty, but since Zinj had hostile relations to so many of the other Imperial Remnants, the New Republic had a pretty free hand in battering down his empire and hunting him down without worrying about upsetting peace negotiations with the Pentastar alignment, the Sutric hegemony, and Greater Maldrud. Zinj did very well early on, absorbing the Tion cluster from the disintegrating Greater Maldrud after Admiral Akbar obliterated Moff Cateles in the Antimeridian sector, and the rest of Greater Maldrud just stepped aside and let it happen, immediately destroying their legitimacy as an Imperial remnant. The Solo Fleet had shattered Zinj's empire, however, and chased him into 10th Crimson Dagger, the fringe of his territory. Salagas was a pretty unremarkable gas giant mining colony, but it's where Zinj made his stand and got crushed. Zinj and his flagship escaped, but his fleet was finished, and with it, his whole empire came crashing down. Some of it got reabsorbed by the New Republic, some of it fell to Sector Moffs, who established friendlier relations with the other Imperial remnants, and joined the Shadow Council and later the First Order. Drakmar is home to the Drakmarians, a methane-breathing reptilian species who fancied themselves regional powers like the Mandalorians. They successfully subjugated other species like the Morsyrians and allied themselves with the Mandalorians in the Mandalorian Wars back in the Old Republic era, but they never amounted to much more than a menace to Quelii sector in particular. They got back up to their old tricks in the Imperial era, and one of Zinj's early assignments was chasing them off Morsyr and subjugating Drakmar for the Empire. Morsyr is not the homeworld of the Morsyrians. Morsyrian is an exonym given to the species by outsiders based on the name of their prominent colony world of Morsyr, but their homeworld's name and location is unknown and may not even be in Quelii sector. The Empire wanted to know, basically just because they hate the idea of other people having secrets, and got pretty aggressive about finding out. This drove the Morsyrians and the Drakmarians into the Rebel Alliance together, despite their animosity towards one another. The Shev and Shevin inhabit the planet Vinsoth, a biome layer cake planet that has Arctic ice on top and bottom, baking deserts at the equator, and temperate grasslands betweensies. The Shevin are like 90% mouth, and while the Shev are humanoid slaves with pale skin and bumpy ridges on the head. You'd think a slave power in the middle of Republic space would have some kind of history, but Vinsoth seems to have flown under the radar completely. Also native to this sector are the Wool-Kabashites of planet Wool-Kabash. They're sentient plasma-eating slugs who feed on starships, kind of like intelligent Minox without wings. No real history to them, though, kind of like the Shev and the Shevin. There's two big species I've been holding out on, though. The first is the Cathar of planet Cathar. The Cathar were an independent world who sided with the Republic during the Exar Kun War and had fought the Mandalorians on numerous occasions, being not that far from Mandalorian space. The Mandalorians and their Sith allies lost that war, and when they started preparing an invasion of the Republic in response, Cathar was one of the first targets of their Neo-Crusader revenge trip. It wasn't a Republic world, so the Republic wouldn't necessarily respond to an attack, but it was a Republic ally who would probably join them in the event of full-scale war with the Mandalorians, so the Mandalorians picked the Cathar off in advance of their attack on Taris. The Cathar were subjugated, enslaved, and over the course of the Mandalorian Wars, the Revan War, and the war with the Sith Triumvirate, almost completely exterminated. The massacres of the defeated Cathars is what led then Jedi Revan to break with the Jedi Order's command to stay out of the war and turn their lightsaber against the Mandalorians. And finally, the Night Sisters of Dathomir. To say that Dathomir is ruled by hot lady witches who ride around mostly naked on rancors is an oversimplification, but not strictly false, so unsurprisingly there are a billion rumors and legends about all the crazy shit that happens on the sexy witch planet, and since it is home to a legit dark side Force tradition, most of these stories are pretty plausible individually, even if it's almost certain that many of them are made up. Legend has it that the Qua, ancient rivals of the Rakatans, colonized the planet tens of thousands of years before the Republic. Legend has it that the Dathomiri came to the planet from another galaxy through teleportation technology that can cross the enormous gulf of dark space between galaxies in an eye blink. Legend has it that the Sith had a secret academy on the planet during the New Sith Wars. Legend has it that the Night Sisters are ancient foes of the Sith dating back to before the Great Hyperspace War, the first war between the Republic and the Sith Empire. Definitely all three of Darth Maul, Savage Opress, and Asajj Ventress were sourced from Dathomir by the conspiracy between Count Dooku and Emperor Palpatine, who definitely got all kinds of dark side juju. I'm not totally convinced that they were actually descended from a hidden, unbroken line of Sith who survived 7th Rusan, but Emperor Palpatine went around investigating dark side stuff all the time. He didn't have to have learned the dark side from the Sith in order to have mastered it, but if he was a Sith, maybe that was a continuation of some kind of ancient alliance between the Sith and the Night Sisters. Getting caught up in the personal machinations of Dooku, Palpatine, Ventress, and Maul is what got the Dathomiri in the crosshairs of the conflict between the CIS, the Shadow Collective, and the Republic-turned-Empire. The planet's ruler at the time, Mother Talzin, was killed, the Dathomiri were decimated, and while the foreboding jungle planet was impossible to conquer, the power of the Dathomiri was broken going forward. More than one Jedi hid out on the planet, famously dark-side aligned and thus easy to hide Force sensitivity on. The Empire had some garrisons there, but for all the rumors and legends, Dathomir is almost never historically relevant as anything except the home planet of many, many dark-side users, and the hiding place of multiple Jedi after Order 66, pretty much all of whom got themselves killed within 10 years. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Sumitra Sector and 10th Crimson Dagger Command in the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Sumitra Sector is the holdings of the royal family of planet Thustra. It's part of the Republic and subject to Republic law, but its foreign policy is dictated by its king, at least to the point where the whole sector went SEP on the command of their king Alaric. A small task force of clone troopers was sent to hopefully reinforce to the Thustran people that this is not how the Republic works, but this small force was inadequate, and the droid army secured Sumitra Sector for the CIS, representing one of the deepest CIS strongholds within Republic space. It was also one of the only targets within the territory of the 10th Crimson Dagger Command, so they ripped Sumitra Sector apart pretty much instantly. The native species of Thustra are the Sephi, pointy-eared humanoids. King Alaric had other species homeworlds as subjects, though. Flax, a tectonically active planet home to the insectoid Flacax species, and Alk-Lelish III, home of the Lelish. The sector was rebel sympathetic in the Galactic Civil War, and the minor world of Tirfon was home to the Tirfon Yellow Aces, a Y-Wing squadron who trained on the planet before the Empire caught wind of it and bombarded the planet's one major town to smithereens and dropped a bunch of poison in the atmosphere to hopefully finish off any survivors and discourage recolonization. The human colonists on the water world of Aquarius also secretly joined the rebellion, offering their underwater colonies as secret bases. The Empire never found these ones, and Aquarius rode out the entire Galactic Civil War largely unscathed, despite hosting rebel safehouses. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Trans-Volta sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Trans-Volta is the domain of the Voltan species of the planet Volta. These are gray-skinned humanoids with cartilaginous bumps on their heads, like horns if horns were curved directly around the head instead of sticking up a few inches off of it. Volta is a very fashion-conscious planet, basically the Gorman of the northern dependencies, but it doesn't have a ton of history. Also in this sector is Nerion, which is at the root of a massive legal snarl between the Corporate Sector Authority, the Hyperspace Navigators Guild, and the Mining Guild, which lasted over 50 years in the Late Republic era, and only ended when the Empire came to power and gave the Mining Guild everything they wanted and told the other two to pound sand. Nerion is full of valuable ore, but maddeningly difficult to land on, so the Empire built an ion shielding station to help keep the magnetic interference down to a dull roar, and started strip mining the planet. The Rebel Alliance sent saboteurs down to blow the shield up the year before Yavin, disrupting operations, which eventually snowballed into a slave uprising of the Wookiees and Mon Calamari imprisoned in the mining camps there. During the Midrim Offensive, the whole planet was basically paralyzed by constant raids and low-grade warfare across the surface, although the Imperials weren't completely kicked out until after the Battle of Jakku and the declaration of the New Republic on Coruscant. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Gweneen sector and the 10th Crimson Dagger Command of the new territories of the Outer Rim. Gwenee is a major regional trade world and planet Borkorash is home to the Resinim Entertainment Complex. So, this sector seems like it's doing alright. Not really anything going on here though. Not every sector has a story.